Hello everyone. I haven't been making much in the way of updates on this build. I've been too busy trying to build. Okay, a couple of things to talk about. I tried making a mold that wraps around the neck. Don't work. I'm going to have to try something else to get these necks done. So, I can't get the mold to sit down properly the way I need it to. Bet if I cut it in half I can get it to work, so don't let me trash that. I made a mold for each neck separately, so I've been keeping the molds around the necks, so I know which mold goes with which neck. Tail that broke. I've got it filled. I'm going to get the hole drilled for that and glue that together in a few minutes. Okay. Other progress that's been made. Pull this tape off. I was using the tape for a minute to get some things set up the way I need them set up. Let me set him aside. I got the central seam down the center of the legs done. What I did is I replicated the pattern that's already on the model. I glued the feet on. That foot did not feel good when I picked it up, which does not make me happy. So let me do this real quick while I'm pulling this blue painter's tape off. Just tape that foot on there so it dries overnight like that. Here, I'll show you with the other leg what I've done. Alright, now I want to replicate the pattern that was already there. The pattern got a lot weaker as we went up near the top, so I just replicated it. And the silver paint's there so I can see highlights and stuff. Looks like a ridge is there, but when I grabbed this leg and started sanding that ridge off, you can see it's the model detail itself. That ridge is there because of the model, not because of my seam filling, which makes me wonder a few things. But anyhow, every time I go to sand the ridge out, I end up with model and I have to re-replicate the details somewhat. So I'm leaving the ridge. I think it's just part of the model the way it is. Okay, now my molding on the tails. Let me show you how that's working. You can see it's working fairly well. It is meshing into the detail around the model fairly well. This one looks like there's a ridge line along there. I saw a similar result in this other tail, which is almost completely done now. And you can tell when I hit it with the silver paint that you really can't tell that that's there. Okay? So this seems to be working very, very well. Now, the only thing I really got left to do on these tails is figure out how to handle the lateral joints, which you have to look really hard to see on this tail. Run around right here. There's one there and one there. I got to figure out how to deal with those joints. I also have to figure out how to deal with those joints on the necks. I'm still having problems with those on the necks. Okay? But this tail is almost done with the seam filling. I'm not going to do any detail work along the bottom of the tail. If I do, I'm going to replicate what I did on the necks. On the legs. Now, the reason I'm not going to do any, if you look at the studio model, the rubber suit guy, and I got to do some cleaning up of seam lines along the end of this tail right here. I just noticed that. If you look at the studio model, there is a different color stripe running down the length of the underside of the tail. And I think they did that because of wear and tear on the suit. So I'm going to put that in there. Okay? Now as for the rubber chicken body itself, the seam line along here, if you start noticing, you will notice the details start fading out like they did on the legs, and I get really, really big scale patterns along the edges of the sides. So I'm going to replicate that like I did on the legs. I'm going to have to be a little bit more careful with it because this does not have a raised ridge pattern like the legs do. So I'm going to have to be really careful in replicating the scale pattern and get my aves really thin. Speaking of getting aves really thin, I tried a couple of things. So let's zoom this out. Okay? What I have in my hand is something a person who does a lot of baking would know on site. It's called parchment paper. It's regular paper that's been impregnated with silicone. I took some of this parchment paper, I folded it in half, and squished some Aves between it. And here is the end result. Okay? If I can get my camera to focus on that really well. You can see that is a little bit thicker than paper. I mean, really, that's more like a heavy cardstock right there instead of... That's more like heavy cardstock. It's about the thickness of heavy cardstock. So I'm learning techniques for getting the Aves really thin. The Aves will not stick to this parchment paper. Okay? It just won't stick to it, which is good. One thing I did learn, though, with repeated use, it will start sticking. The Aves starts pulling off the silicone. Another thing I did with the Aves is I put it in my rubber mold, took the parchment paper, put it over it, and then smashed it as flat as I could. That gave me, and I'm peeling this out of the mold right now, and I gotta be careful because it's really fragile, a really thin sheet of dragon scales. Alright? So let me see if my camera will behave itself when I zoom in on this. Of course, I want to focus on everything but it. There. You can see the scale pattern on the underside. You see the scale pattern just fine on the upper side. Okay? And this is pretty thin, and I'm sure if I put it in some hot water, I can just completely flatten it. What I intend to do with this is two things. I want to take and flatten it, and then cut out the dragon scale pattern, and try to layer it down on top of my tail. Because I have a problem with the tail in this curve spot right here, and I've been trying to figure out how to replicate the scale pattern up along the curve spot like it is up here. If I can get it to replicate along that curve spot, then I'm in great shape, and I've got this tail, this one segment of tail done. The other tail, for some strange crazy reason, well, it's not that strange and crazy, I decided I was going to make it more curvy. I could have done two straight tails like this or two curvy tails like this. I decided to do one of each. Okay? Since this tail is more curvy, and this tail broke in many pieces more than once, and I had to pin it, things aren't lined up 100% correct. So I'm going to have a lot of fun getting this one done, especially with the curves on it. Because my molds aren't designed for the curves. And it's going to be hard to get my molds to work with those curves, I think. So I got to come up with making my Aves as thin as possible and pour it on here. I also might get a little bit of actual liquid resin and mold it that way and try that. We will see. But anyhow, one last thing to talk about on the update. Wings. I got the seam on this one done. You can see there's a bump there, but you really can't see where the ridge is at all. I got the pattern to replicate on that one okay. You can see a bump, but you can't see... I mean, I can't do anything about the bump. That's actually molded plastic unless I completely strip that pattern off and reapply it. I mean, I probably could if I use this one as a guide. They're not even symmetric, so it would be really hard to do. So I'm just going to be happy with a raised surface right there. Unless I get really uptight and anal and try to fix that tomorrow or the next day. But I got enough to do with just this one tail alone. This one right here, I've got a nice little ridge line there that is very visible, even at arm's length. Whereas this one at arm's length, you can see the raised portion of it, but that's about it. Okay? And again, the raised portion on this one is mainly due to molding and the way the part is than anything I've done. But anyhow, I still have yet to trim the flash off from around the edges of the wings too. That's something I'm going to have to be really careful with. But anyhow, I've been rambling for a bit. Just thought I'd give you guys a good comprehensive update of where I'm at. I haven't been doing too much in the ways of updates with this thing. Again, I almost got the legs done, which makes me happy. The body I can get done if I can get an hour free without anyone interrupting me. I can probably finish up the seams along the sides of the body. That just leaves me the necks and tails and try to fix this bad seam on this wing. I think I know what I'm going to do. I'll give that a try. Anyhow, I will talk to you guys later.